Welcome to the All Things Circular podcast, your gateway to the circular economy. Hosted by industry experts Victoria Darcy and Rich Bolger. Every episode is proof that circularity isn't just good for the planet. It's a smart business decision. Our mission is simple: to empower, to inform, and to show you how to make the circular economy work for you.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the All Things Circular podcast. I'm really excited about this one. We've got Josh Beasley, who is the CEO of RL Equity, and of course my good friend and colleague, Mr. Rich Bolger.
Good to see you. Thank you very much, Vic. And I am also very excited to have Josh Beasley here with us talking about RL Equity. Josh, you've had a pretty dynamic background. I believe you were actually the Lifetime Achievement Award winner at Mobile Disrupt last year. So I think you started in the space when you were 2.
Yeah, it was just last year. No, thank you very much for having me. And I'm super excited to be on this podcast, having seen some of the great content that you're putting together for it. I think it's needed. I think we need to be talking more about how we move from a linear to a circular economy, because the opportunity that's before us simply isn't being addressed. So thank you for having me. In terms of my background, I have lived through linear. Every role I've had has been in a different part of the circular economy, be it repair, insurance, trading, 3PL, and none of it is interconnected. That's the opportunity that's right before all of us here. You've got great companies performing a modular service and they're not thinking about the next step in the journey or what came before them. And this is such a big opportunity and a gap that we need to fill.
100%. We were just talking that there's only one college on the planet right now that has a college curriculum on reverse, but it really is one half of a product's journey in a circular movement to the point of use, away from, and back to. But reverse is complicated. Mm-hmm. There's no one size fits all, and very few people even understand the intricacies of platforms and asset recovery streams, and operations and repair and value generation. You are taking a unique approach of seeing the activity that's going on in mergers and acquisitions. There have been a few recent big ones that we'll talk about that are taking place. But talk to me a little bit about what RL Equity is and how your background gave you the courage and the commitment to go through and become CEO of a company that's focusing on sustainability.
Certainly. And I think just before we go into that, you mentioned a really important point, and that is we all talk about forward and reverse. We need to be thinking about them as one and the same. You think about a product's life cycle and how it begins. You've got design teams who are passing over designs to contract manufacturers who are going away and building products, injecting all new raw materials. They're bringing those products to market, which has huge connotations in its own right. You've then got in-life services that are supporting those products in their first use cycle. Then what happens at the end? That, for me, isn't the point where reverse kicks in. This is where circularity should kick in. So at the end of that first use cycle, consumers should know these are my options. Yeah, I can trade it in. I can recover some value. I can recycle it if it's broken. But all these options are available, but we don't talk about them.
We don't. And I think what's really interesting, you hit on it, a couple of points I just want to pick up, is the first one is circular design.
Yep.
Now we're seeing more and more manufacturers actually begin to promote themselves on circular design, which is a wonderful thing, because anything that's chassis-based, the chassis should actually be able to stay in situ,
yep.
As the technology refreshes it and upgrades. But also interestingly, and we've been chatting a little bit about this at dinner last night, people do realize that there are rare earth elements that are now scarce. And they're scarce for a number of reasons, scarcity in the Earth's crust being one, but geopolitical is another. And I think one of the critical points I kind of want to, get your opinion on is how important it is from a circularity perspective, not only to kind of understand it, but to act and actually really kind of make our own supply chains more robust.
Yeah, well, when we think about components, right, they contain so many rare minerals that are going to run out. Yet we've got so many products. I mean, look in this room, there are literally probably 30 electronic gadgets that all contain raw materials that could be reused. So when we're thinking about product design and we're putting something out there, we should be thinking about the recovery process. What happens when this product reaches the end of its first, and I don't like using the word life. I like to talk in use cycles.
Yeah.
So when you buy a product, that is your use cycle. that doesn't mean that that product's at the end of its life when you're done with it. It then goes on to the next one, which, has many different shapes and sizes. But coming on to the point around design, everything should be thought about in light of recovery. What happens when this needs to go to its next stage? And I had the benefit of working for a very large contract manufacturer. So I was out in South China working for Flextronics. They had huge facilities out there building all sorts of products, from consumer electronics to medical devices, even to modular homes and modular properties. It was a really fascinating business. But being out there and seeing the scale of these operations and what goes into product design, it's fascinating. But design is centered around the initial use case of that product. It's about, how do we make this product as attractive as possible to the first person that uses it? We don't think about what happens next.
Right.
And that's why you look at phones, mobile phones, cell phones. The average lifetime of a cell phone right now is under 4 years. Yet you can get software updates on an iPhone for 7 or 8.
Well, that's just for customer one. I've seen statistics that say the average cell phone will live in the hands of 3 different people before it runs to the end of its use cycle. So
absolutely.
You've got to find out who is customer 2, who is customer 3, what are their price points, what's good, better, best to them in different parts of the world where it's varied. Japan has much higher standards than Mexico, for instance. An A in Mexico may not be an A in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's also this dynamic of understanding sales and marketing that exists within used products in the circular economy that is understood.
Yeah, and I also think, sorry, I was just going to say, I always think it's the respect of that second and third customer. And I think, perhaps that's the piece that's been missing so far, is that perhaps manufacturers, to your point, it shouldn't just be lifetime. It should be the use cycle. And actually, they should put value against the second use cycle and the third use cycle.
Well, that is so important. And it brings me on to what I think is the biggest opportunity in circularity. And you're right, Vic, that second and third customer today are overlooked. Whereas actually, if you think of, let's take an iPhone as an example. That device sells for $1,000 new, let's say. At the end of a 3-year or 4-year use cycle, that device is still worth $400. So if you had the right circular approach to remarketing that device, you can monetize it 2, 3, 4, 5 times over. So instead of making $1,000 on the product, you're making 2.5, 3.
Well, one of the things that you see exist within the mobility industry, particularly with the what I like to call the fruit phone.
Yeah.
Every year, apples fall from the tree in the fall. Every fall, there's a new device that has more bells and whistles and a higher price tag. And one of the only reasons why customers can afford that higher price tag is because there's residual value on the one that they have in their hand that can be applied. So done right, you can actually see understanding customer 2 and being able to extract that value, accelerate the sales cycle, which is a different way of business thinking that's just starting to come to light.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a world where brand new product and secondhand product coexist in absolute harmony.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge believer that consumers should have a freedom of choice between new and used product, because in some cases, the consumer has a genuine need to acquire new. And they should have that choice, and it shouldn't be, manipulated by sales spiels saying, you're a bad consumer because you're choosing new. That's not true. It's a lot of things in life, are not about what you acquire, but what you do with it. And that's what we need to be focusing on here. It's like, right, new could be a perfect fit for you, but here's what you should do with it when you no longer need it. We don't educate people enough in that space. And I think it's because of the obsession over new. And you take the US market, for example, with telcos. A lot of the telco contracts over there bundle a device and airtime, which is the traditional way that you would sell that type of product.
Sure.
But actually, decoupling can be far more financially beneficial for both the telco and the consumer. So like over here in the UK now, we've got a lot of 3-year contracts that are airtime only, bring your own device. And consumers are then latching onto that and are actually retaining hardware for longer because they know that they're getting a more affordable airtime deal because they're doing it. So people are clocking onto it. And I think this is what we need to drive more of as a whole industry, not only in mobility, but across all product usership cycles, laying out the options and saying, this is what you should do according to when your use cycle ends.
So to that end, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Two-parter. So the first one is, how are investors now perceiving circularity, sort of, in this space, in the sphere that we work in? And also, what barriers are there towards investment?
Absolutely. And this is exactly why we've set up RL Equity. So if you look at the linear supply chain, you've got manufacturers, 3PLs, repairers, trade-in providers, recyclers, and there's many more stakeholders. I've oversimplified it. Every single one of those businesses are making a significant margin on handling that one product. So from an investor standpoint, I look at it and think, well, actually, if I can put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those stakeholders together, what is the profit generation on the back of that consolidation? Well, it's 5 times what I could get from one of those vendors on their own. So we're seeing a huge appetite from an investor standpoint, purely on the basis of profit. But similarly, on the flip side, there's obviously a huge need and drive for all of us to become more sustainable. I think take business out of the equation. All of us as human beings know that we do not live a sustainable life right now. So it's a highly investable space as we look to not only reap the rewards of circularity, but also reap the benefit for our planet and for humanity, and in its own right. It's a huge thing. So I see a ton of funds that have been set up that are targeting specifically circular businesses, and the vertical is kind of agnostic, if you like. It's about circular practice, and that could apply to fashion, consumer electronics, houses, cars. I think electric cars are now becoming all the more prominent. I don't drive one myself, right? But that's just a personal preference. But if you look at the way they're produced, they're built in a more modular format than that of a conventional petrol or diesel vehicle. So when you think about downstreaming, the battery is a discussion in its own right, but the rest of the vehicle is more salvageable.
Yeah.
Right? So again, there's more reusable. Yeah, exactly. So you can recover components of that vehicle and place it in another one in a more effective manner than perhaps conventional fuel vehicles.
Now, it sounds like we're aligned on a common definition of the circular economy.
Yep.
Measuring the amount of times a product can go from the hands of the first customer into the hands of the next customer, and seeing how often you can do that. Who is customer 2, 3, and 4? We had discussed. You mentioned automotive.
Yep.
And you mentioned housing just a second ago. My opinion, those are 2 of the most successful circular economies that have ever existed, where you do have that coexistence, where you've got listing agents in real estate whose job is to go out and hunt supply. You got selling agents whose target is to go through and sell the home to whoever is in the market for a home. Automotive, the same thing. Your used car dealership complements the new sales dealership because they're applying the value to the new sale, and that really is a appropriate usage of a product's residual value. They've made it really easy to go through and do that. Now technology is making it a whole lot simpler to match used supply with used demand, but there's underlying functions that need to exist in order to have a used environment. Financing, warranty options.
Yep.
Someone buying something used might not need the same warranty as someone who's buying something used.
But it's also the price of that.
And the price.
Because I think there's a fundamental mismatch to how people actually attribute a real world price to something. We used to see it where Rich and I both used to work for a major vendor, and we used to see that on the remanufacturing items, which were priced, generally 30 to 40% lower, but the cost of the services was the same because the cost of the services had been priced against the new product. And that actually was a real mismatch. And again, it was not understanding that second use cycle.
And it's quite interesting, that point you touch on there, because there's a perception that new products, consumers want warranties and things like that on new products because it's a high value product. People, don't want to bear the price of damage.
And that's how they've sold product 1 for a long time.
However, customer 2 and 3 are actually more dependent on a warranty in many cases because of the affordability angle. Like if you look at customer 1 who's buying a new product, it's highly likely that they have greater disposable income to spend on repairing a product if something goes wrong. Whereas customer 2 and 3, and again, hate to stereotype, and that's not where I'm going with this, but customer 2 and 3 need more protection as a buyer. So actually their willingness to acquire a warranty can in some cases be much higher than that of customer 1. But you've got to price it right and you've got to get the benefits right. If you're, for example, putting a warranty on a high-end laptop that's $3,000 brand new, and it's the same price as the same warranty you're applying to a laptop 3 years down the line, people aren't going to go for it. But if you actually match the warranty to the service you're providing to the residual value of the product, it all becomes a win. And I want to go back a step further to something you said on automotive, because that is a really interesting model to look at. Consumers understand the residual benefit in automotive because most cars are not actually bought outright. They're bought on a finance deal. And how do you get on that finance deal? You put down a deposit that then unlocks the monthly payments. Well, how do you get the deposit? You trade in the car you've got now to unlock the residual or the net finance that you have available to you from that car, and you put it down on the next one.
And the more you get from that, you're going to spend more on the next new vehicle.
It creates more disposable income. So the OEM wins, the retailer wins, everybody wins from that ecosystem. Whereas we don't have that for a lot of products today. And actually, in many cases, consumers don't understand how great the residual value is on some of the products that are laying dormant in drawers and just lying around in homes. Like, for example, that number I gave you before on iPhones. Like, say iPhone is 3 years old. There's $400 worth of value potentially sat in that device. Do you think people would leave it sat in a drawer if they knew that value was there? You know, we know right now that the secondary market for smartphones is roughly a fifth of the size of new comparative in shipments last year. That's not because people don't want to use the secondary market or circular market. It's because they don't understand its value or how to unlock it.
I want to pull one thread on what we talked about with warranty, because I think you're right. I think people who are buying a used product need security.
Yeah.
But the security they need is different than someone buying new. When I was running, a major carrier's return operation, when they bought something new and we did a warranty claim for it, we sent them a pristine device that looked and felt like new, in addition to making sure that it works. But the economics of taking something, ripping it apart, re-anodizing it if that's needed, to go through and make something pristine and like new with that customer promise is a little bit different than making sure that, hey, we'll make sure that your thing works. Like if you go through and your car has an engine light on, they're not going to give you a new car. They're going to fix the engine. So I'm seeing modifications in warranty for same unit functional repair being different than what consumers need to get confidence to buy product one. So how do you see the warranty market between new and used be affordable to customer 2, 3, and 4?
Well, thankfully, the new for old mentality is moving away in warranty. Like, for example, if I've been using my device for 3 years, it's got a few scratches on it, and say I completely, destroy that device beyond recognition, or it's lost or stolen, I don't care if my insurance company provides me with a brand new device or one that's got scratches on it like the one I'm using today. All I want is for my core functionality to be restored. So there's a growing acceptance to the use of grade B and C, or, in consumer terms, heavily scratched devices or lightly scratched devices being redeployed in the supply chain. And for example, if you have a scratched screen, there's things that you can apply to that to make that not become an issue. Like you can put a screen protector on there and you can gloss right over the scratches. So I think there is a growing reception to that, in line with the commercial benefit that you get from running that type of program. I know, for example, with same unit repair, the average severity on a claim, which is your cost of claim, is typically about a third of what it would be to replace that unit new for old, perhaps less than a third. In some cases, it's as simple as swapping out a battery, which could be 60, 80 pounds. So being able to leverage that.
Or it could be a used battery that's not necessarily fully chargeable.
100%. There are ways and means of testing recovered product that means that they can be reintroduced into supply chain and really work as an effective component for someone else. But there are ways and means, again, of bringing down that cost in supply chain, which has a net benefit to all stakeholders. And I'm glad that we're finally realizing that, because when I started out working in insurance, it was all new for old. And actually trying to move the consumer back from that expectation is really, really difficult. Because if someone's been on a new for old policy and they've received a new device when their old one has been replaced, trying to get them to be used to the fact that going forward, they're not going to have that new for old experience and it's actually going to be used, there's a value deficit in their mind. And you've got to educate them on why that's the case. And the biggest educator in that regard is to reduce the cost of their device protection.
But also, I'm going to add into that, actually, because for me, one of the things that people seem to get wrong is the residual value. And I think it's because it's misunderstood.
Right.
We were chatting at dinner last night about one of the manufacturers giving a flat sort of 10% residual value on their assets. And actually, the actual residual value was more like 30 to 35%. Now, if you then look along the chain reaction there, when we're talking about finance and we're talking about all the other elements that encompass the circular economy, by increasing that residual value means it could lower the price of the lease. And what happens when you lower the price of the customer? The customer will upgrade.
Absolutely.
Or buy for the first time.
Exactly. And I think there is this mindset that we need to really unlock, that there's so many different sections along this circular journey that actually are profitability driven.
100%. So on your first point around residual values, it's a really interesting one because that stat actually comes from the lease and finance world. You've got big banks out there that are lending money so that corporates can lease and finance assets for their employees, right? Which is fantastic because it means you can flip units on and off lease as and when you need them. So brilliant. But a lot of those banks are holding a floor residual. The floor residual is what they hold as the book residual when that product comes back. So that's your 10%. But in reality, they've got a target actualization on that residual that could be 2x what they have on the book. So all in, they know that there's a net gain at the end of lease. But actually, that's just hiked the cost of that lease to the first customer. So again, there's an affordability challenge that comes with it.
And it involves a new skill set. When you're talking about manufacturers, they acquire the raw materials that come in on a production schedule.
Yep.
I need this amount of steel. I need this amount of rubber. I need this amount of copper. I need this amount of gold. I need these microchips. How much are they? And their procurement folks are trained how to go through and source that. Used procurement is different. Your used car lot doesn't go through and buy things from a factory. They've got to go through and figure out, well, this car is driving on the lot. I don't know how many green ones, how many black ones. I don't know how many electric ones. I don't know how many trucks. I don't know how many cars. And they're all going to be in different cosmetic condition, good, better, best.
Mm-hmm.
So how you go through and price those is an entirely different skill set that I just see missing.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's another point that you've just opened up there as well, which is what does good, better, best mean? Right? I think we as industry experts can define good, better, best when it comes to the product categories we know. But to Joe Blogg's consumer, what does it actually mean? And we have a huge problem in consumer electronics with that because you'll hear the terms, floating around like grade A, B, and C. I can define it. You guys can probably define it as well. But to most consumers who are shopping around for a product, they don't get it.
Well, we were just talking because the lights literally went off.
Yeah.
and here in the UK, you've got to press down to turn on. In the US, you've got to flip the switch up to turn on.
Yep.
So defining good, better, best is different in different parts of the world.
Yeah, and there's something. So I spent a lot of my career working in financial services, and you have this thing which is driven by the regulator called Know Your Customer. And you have to demonstrate when you're marketing a financial services product that you understand the target customer who is going to acquire that product and that you construct the product in a way that the customer understands what they're buying. That should apply to every product that's being sold because there are so many customers who either end up buying something they don't need or being disappointed with what they've bought because they didn't understand grade C, for example. They thought they were going to get a grade A unit, had no scratches on it, all good. But they've bought grade C and they don't get it. So I think there's an element of simplification we need to bring to the POS that will be fundamental to driving circularity. Because when people understand what's available to them and what constitutes that differential in price point, they'll know what they're buying and people will gravitate towards the right product for them.
Now, interestingly, so if we sort of draw on those points, but take it back, to the M&A portion, are you seeing because these are quite unique skills. These aren't skills that you can just turn on. These are learned skills for, people that have been in the industries that fundamentally understand it. So are you seeing from an M&A perspective, OEMs begin to look at acquisition in order to get these skills? Is that a trend that you're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been part of businesses that kind of, for example, will offer insurance and decide they want to get into trade-in or want to get into repair. And they start to try and build from within, but they don't have the fundamental subject matter expertise to make that linear module a success. And again, circularity and linear, whilst they might be seen as two opposites, are actually one and the same. You have to bring them together. So we're seeing a lot of companies who have considered growing organically by doing what I just said, trying to build from the ground up. now pivot to think, actually, rather than building this from the ground up, let me go and acquire someone who really understands what it is I want to do, because that'll lead to the subject matter expertise being brought along I can bolt onto my business in terms of functionality. But at the same time, it brings people with it who also really understand their niche. And that is the opportunity we're seeing from an M&A standpoint. Companies are wanting to buy expertise that extend their value chain. And there's a lot of hunger and desire, not only from investors, but from existing entities who want to extend their value chain.
Yeah, I mean, we see it, from LinkedIn. I think we all get those notifications from you pick your consultant company, trying to find experts in the field to go through and kind of check the pulse on, because mergers and acquisitions for sustainability or circular economy companies, that there's an appeal to that right now. That's just getting stronger and stronger as legislations increase.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of companies that are saying, hey, I want to invest in circular economy, repair, sustainability brands. But what makes RL Equity different from all of those people that are trying to go through and get in this space and gobble up different companies and try to go through and Frankenstein a circular economy program together?
Well, if you take an entity that's operating in this space, let's use a repair company, for example. That company is probably really good at repairing product. Probably don't know the first thing about what it means to buy or sell a business. And that's where we come in, having done it. I mean, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been advising on the sale and acquisition of companies, helping people out in the industry who we know. And we decided to commercialize it because there's such a need for that support. I mean, we're fortunate at RL Equity that we've lived, slept, and breathed circularity in various different stages of supply chain. So we know enough about specific industries, and we know enough about buy-sell to bring two parties together that we know can work, which is the fundamental difference. Because if you go to a more generalist M&A company, they might have closed thousands of deals, but have they ever worked in repair? Have they ever worked in insurance? Have they ever worked in 3PL? Probably not. So the advice that you're going to pay for is going to be very expensive and very generic. Whereas what we bring is that subject matter expertise against every touch point of the supply chain that positions us best to bring two entities together.
I think it's really important, actually, because I think part of what you're doing as well is cultural.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all seen large acquisitions happen and fail because of the cultural mismatch. Because you can't just bring two entities, two different mindsets, two different ethics almost together and just expect them to mesh and expect them to work.
Yeah, and that's something that we're really hot on as RL Equity. We won't go into a deal and simply act as a broker. We are really hot on post-deal, working with both companies to manage that integration phase. Because I've seen so many acquisitions fail, not because the companies were the wrong companies to do the deal, it was the right deal. But when it comes to integration, they follow the wrong process. Either one company tries to strong arm the other, and you end up losing subject matter expertise along the way. Or, for example, you leave the two companies as separate entities. And again, that presents an opportunity cost because there's no synergy benefit that you're capitalizing on. So we're really hot on that process. And candidly, if a company comes to us and says, hey, I'd like you to find me a company to acquire, but that's where I want you to stop, I'd very politely say that's not one for us, because I don't want a deal to happen that we've introduced that then ends up being unsuccessful because of integration, because that just simply shouldn't happen. There's no excuse for that, in my opinion, when it comes to this space.
So, Josh, let's just say one of our listeners here, is, a part of a supply chain, or a small business that's creating something, and they want to move into another section of their supply chain, another section of circularity. What advice would you give them? Where should they start?
Well, you've got to know your value chain and where you fit within the value chain. Simplest exercise you can do is get a blank sheet of paper and look at where you fit into a product ecosystem. So again, I'll stick with the repair example just because we've used it already. But when does a repairer interact with a product? It's when something goes wrong, or at the end of a use cycle when it needs a quick refurbishment before going back out to market. So that's what happens in repair. Well, what happens before repair? Well, the product's been sold. Who's it been sold by? It's been sold by a retailer, a telco, any form of intermediary. What services do they provide prior to that product being sold to get it ready for market? Kitting, configuration, branding. They're all front-end services that happen before you in the value chain. And then look at what happens after you. So once you've prepared a product, what happens then? Well, it's remarketed. Who's remarketing it? Who are the companies that are playing in that space of remarketing? And what type of profit are they making? And then you can look around you from a value chain standpoint and see where you can bolt on capability that will extend your hand in the value chain. That's the first thing to understand is it's your company, where you fit in the value chain and what services exist around you that you can monetize. And then if you're able to, for example, bolt on kitting and config services to the front end of your business as a repairer, then you've just created a new profit center that increases the valuation of your business. So that for me is fundamental. It's understanding your value chain, where you fit in, and where your industry is going.
So we're covering a lot of ground here, and I love it. We're talking about all the different specialized elements in returns that people don't think about: repair, warranty, recycling, or some of the common ones, but the nuances of appealing to brands versus distributors versus the secondary market, and customer differentiation of what good, better, best is, in addition to like new, which all companies are really good at knowing what their first customer wants. Want it to look like new, want a good warranty, want a decent price and a good return program, with few understanding, what customer 2, 3, and 4 want. And we can share some stories on that later on. But I want to try to drill into. Sounds like you've got a broad brush with RL equity, but I want to find your love language. We've talked a lot about technology, but retail apparel is growing 3 times faster in a used sense than customer 1 in the new sense. So are you focused on one particular vertical within RL, or are you open to other category sets? Can you talk a little bit about that?
We try and remain product agnostic, right? Because I think circularity is much bigger than a vertical. So we're helping companies in fashion, we're helping companies in contract manufacturing, the service space, to consumer electronics, we touch it all. My specific subject matter expertise as an individual is heavily centered on consumer electronics. So a lot of companies approach me because of that. So naturally we end up, servicing more projects in that domain than others. But we are remaining very much open-minded to supporting multiple verticals, because I don't think the product matters. What matters is that we're not generating waste through inefficient distribution and management of that product during its true lifetime.
I think that's really important, because lots of what we talk about today is cross-industry. These are principles. These are principles of reuse, principles of lack of waste, principles of of the whole circular economy. And it doesn't really matter whether it is apparel or whether it is service. The principles are the same.
Well, if you look at sorry to cut across there, if you look at like an e-commerce platform, how many different types of products are they selling? Like hundreds of thousands, millions. All of those products at some point end up coming back. So if you're just looking at one category, you're closing off a huge amount of the market. So that's why we've got to remain open-minded to it, because there's a huge problem globally now with returns. There are warehouses full of return goods that sit on a shelf, depreciate to the point where they're worth nothing. We can help fill that void by bringing in the right circular services and by bringing the right partners to the table.
I would take that a little bit deeper, actually, because one of the things that frustrates me the most is this overuse of recycling. And I think people think, recycling is really green, I recycle this. But people don't realize that that's actually the very last point of this journey, regardless of what you're talking about. Reuse is where it needs to go. And it does. It really frustrates. Yeah, absolutely. But it just really frustrates me that people jump immediately to recycling. And that's something I'm really hoping that culturally and, certainly with sort of the skills that you're applying to the mergers and acquisitions for OEMs, they can really begin to build upon. Because not only is it the right thing to do, it's a profitable thing to do, to bring it back to that use cycle, that second use cycle, that third use cycle.
Absolutely. And like fashion and apparel, as you just mentioned, there is a growing consumer acceptance to used. And platforms like Vinted have helped tremendously with that, because it's built awareness around, number one, the saving you can generate by buying used. But secondly, that you can get very, very high quality goods that are used that will last you for a very long time. The old perception used to be, it's been used once, throw it away, it's done. But consumers are actually educating themselves. And I think that is a travesty in a way. We as an industry should be educating consumers. They shouldn't be having to Google things and look up, what should I do with this product? OEMs, retailers, trading companies, service providers, we should be pushing that information. So when it comes to things like trading and driving a second use cycle versus recycling, we should be pushing information to customers to say, hey, how many products have you got laying around at home? Did you know they're worth X? Here's how you sell them. Here's how you get them into that circular economy. We don't do enough of it. We're reliant on customers doing their own research, which is just wrong.
It is. And one thing I want to kind of draw back to, we started the conversation talking about the scarcity of certain elements, and I challenge all of our listeners out there to open your drawers. How many electronics have you got in your drawers? I'm guilty.
So am I. I'm not going to sit here and say, no, I've traded in everything I've got. No, if you went through my house, you'd find loads of products. But again, I'm someone in the industry who has lived, slept, and breathed these things for years. And still, I have a ton of products that I don't know what the best path is. And we've got to fill that void. I think there's a huge information gap. And there's also the challenge of misinformation. Like you've got things out there around buying used that just simply aren't true, either aren't true or don't resonate with the consumer. So like, for example, on re-commerce platforms for buying used tech, we talk about, by buying this product, you helped us save 93 million litres of water, right? Okay, I understand. I understand how it's been calculated. Someone hasn't just plucked that figure out of thin air. But that doesn't resonate with an end customer. What we should be saying is by buying this product, you're saving yourself $300 or whatever the number is, because let's just be honest, consumers are driven by price. It's still a very price-driven market. But also by doing that, you prevented this product going to landfill. It's got at least 4 years worth of OEM software updates that are still available for it, and just educating people on the true benefits of use versus
Cherry on top.
Yeah, versus just throwing out all this information that really doesn't resonate.
But from a vendor's perspective, that's a new license. That product has been mined, so all the energy's been expended, the raw materials have been extracted, but you can put a license on top of that and send it on another life. That's margin.
Yeah.
That's pure.
And business models are changing to where the good companies aren't making more money by selling more new things. They're making more money by leveraging the value of things that they've already made. And the great ones are harnessing that value to sell more new things and creating new revenue streams. One of the benefits of the All Things Circular podcast is we're bringing not just diversity of experience and thought, but we're also kind of tapping into different cultures.
Yep.
The European market is different than the U.S. market, and RL Equity is investing in a global market. So what are some trends that you're seeing? Similarities, differences between, let's just say, the European market versus the U.S. market?
Well, I think the way that products are acquired is different globally. Like we talked before about bundle deals where you're getting like airtime and advice, for example, in mobility, or you go in product standalone where you buy the subsequent services one by one. And I would say the US has very much a bundle culture, whereas in Europe we're going more modular. Hold that thought.
The U.S. very much like a bundle class.
So we do more modular, and then we're on 38 minutes.
Oh, sorry, I've
it's good. It's really good. Like content. I think it's engaging, right? So
Yeah, we can wrap it up.
more modular.
Yeah. Yes, so in Europe, we tend to have a more modular culture where people want to buy items one by one. And then that's kind of like a build your own deal type economy. Whereas the US, it's more about take this bundle and save X, Y, Z. So we see different buying habits, but we also see different approaches towards end of life or end of use cycle, should I say. Like there's certain countries in Europe where we see a culture where people like to hold on to things. People would rather have an item in a drawer in case they need it again versus actually passing it down into another use cycle. Whereas I think in the US, to counter that, a lot of people actually bring products back at the end of their use cycle, particularly in consumer electronics. And that's actually driven by the bundle/contractual culture that you've got, where people are saying, hey, bring that product back and enter into a new contract with the latest device, all singing, all dancing. So you've done that quite well in a sense, particularly when I think about phones, right? And the telcos are driving people to upgrade. So there are some real nuances to think about. And as RL Equity, we service all of them. And we're trying to find the best of both worlds scenario because there are benefits to bundles, there are benefits to modularity. It all depends on the product and the businesses and the consumers that you're serving. So it's knowing your market, knowing your business, knowing your customers. And that's the level of detail we get into as an entity.
That's great.
Yeah, Josh, it's been a lot of fun talking and getting to know you and your mission a little bit more. Congratulations on the step into RL equity. I think it's very much needed in the world today. Before we end, want to go through and educate our users. How do they find you and RL equity, and any parting thoughts that you have for today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as RL Equity, we're obviously building a new brand, but you'll find us online, you'll find us on LinkedIn, and I would certainly encourage you to reach out if you have any thoughts or ideas. It doesn't necessarily have to be to do with the sale of a business. It could just be a great idea or a concept you want to explore. We'll give you the time to explore it, and we'll give you very honest feedback about how we perceive it. Because I think sometimes we do need a little bit more brutal honesty to get to the right solution. I think sometimes we dance around things, whereas we're built on being direct, respectful, but direct. So you can reach out to me, reach out to Dave, reach out to Tom, who are my co-founders, and we'll help you navigate that. And I think what I want to see from us as an industry moving forward is embracing the opportunity that circular presents. Because quite often circular is seen as being the enemy of new. And it's the polar opposite. Like we've talked about for the last 40 minutes, right?
So complimentary.
It's so complementary. It extends the value chain. Everyone makes more money from it. Let's just cut to the chase. So there's a reason to do it. So I'd love to see as a whole industry is get more collaborative between manufacturers, OEMs, retailers, distributors, recyclers. I want more collaboration.
Communicate and collaborate, right?
100%.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, I find these discussions so informative and educational because M&A is not something that, an area that I come from, and I'm fascinated by it, but I'm really encouraged by it as well.
Yeah, and I guess there's one other thing that I would say about company positioning, and this is pretty fundamental now in circularity. We've moved from a product ownership economy to one where as a service is becoming the preferred route. And companies shied away from as a service years ago because they wanted to buy products. So products reach the end of its life cycle, they buy it, they might refurbish it, and then they'll resell it. And it creates a great cash margin opportunity. But it's also a huge limiting factor when it comes to selling a business because that risk that you're bringing in by acquiring product devalues the future sale potential of the entity. So as companies move forward, think about how you collaborate with others and how you perform as a service as opposed to taking on unnecessary asset risk, because that'll help you command a much higher valuation for your entity moving forward.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for tuning in to All Things Circular. Thank you very much to Josh and my lovely partner, Vic.
Thank you all. See you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. Please head over to allthingscircular.com to learn more.